All right, shalom, shalom, shalom. You are live and direct once again with your Akazaki Yahoo, and I'm giving all praises to Yahweh, Bashem HaMashiach, Malak Yahweh Shai, and to the 12 tribes of Israel who are scattered to the four quarters of the earth. I say shalom, wa baruchim. That is peace and blessings. And I cannot wait to the day when the Most High brings us back together, and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation, under the Most High power, under one covenant, back in our own land with a heart of flesh and no more a heart of stone, with our enemies, our adversaries, and all those who hate us under our feet. Hallelujah. All praises to the Almighty Yah.
So be it. Hallelujah.
Yes, indeed. This evening I am joined by my most esteemed Ak Kenaniah. Shalom, Aki.
Hey, Shalom Aki. Shalom Yasharal. Kwam Yashala.
Yes, indeed. Rise, Israel, rise. It's definitely time to rise. Definitely time to get it in gear and get things resolved. As the Most High will be sending back Hamashiach soon. How soon? Soon enough. So get prepared, get your house in order, and make preparation for the return of Hamashiach. Meanwhile, we got a nice little story for us coming from Black Culture Unlocked. Shout out to those brothers. Link is always in the description box. Why Black Americans were cut off from their true history. We're going to get right to it and get through it here. Here we go.
They said, do they know that they're the Songhai people? So the plantation owners who travel over there to seek his advice said, well, of course they know that they come from the great Songhai Empire. Well, that's your problem. You can't let them know that they came from greatness, from grandeur, from beauty.
Ask a Black American where their great-great-grandparents came from, and you'll often hear a pause, then a guess. Maybe Africa, maybe somewhere West African, maybe just a shrug. But it's not because they don't care. It's because the truth was ripped from them systematically, intentionally, and violently. Centuries ago, a name, a language, a home, and a people, all stolen in a single transatlantic voyage. But what's even sicker is how every step afterward, from plantations to paperwork to public schools, was designed to make sure that erasure lasted forever. This wasn't history lost in time. This was memory destroyed on purpose. So why Black people don't know their origin? Let's find out. When those slave ships left the African coast, they weren't just carrying bound bodies. They were exporting people stripped of remembrance. And this is where the sickness begins. Not in the physical chains, but in the ritual erasure of lineage. Before a single foot touched American soil, the project to wipe out memory had already begun, not for the sake of logistics, but for domination. Every person loaded into those halls had once belonged to something. A lineage, a clan, a sacred rhythm of time passed through ancestors and oral wisdom. Many came from societies that measured life not in years, but in names, totems, and stories passed from grandmother to grandchild. In the Igbo, Wolof, and Ashanti traditions, your identity wasn't something you created. It was something you inherited. To know who you were was to know who came before you. So what did the slave traders do? They didn't just kidnap, they served. They intentionally prevented enslaved Africans from carrying any names, symbols, or heirlooms that would connect them to the past. Many were intentionally mixed with strangers, not because it was easier to transport them, but because shared languages or clan ties were seen as threats. If a group of people could remember who they were together, they might organize, they might resist, they might reclaim it. And that was unacceptable to the empire of profit. But this wasn't just psychological warfare, it was a spiritual attack. Because in many West African belief systems, your ancestors weren't just the past, they were living forces, protectors, voices in dreams and rituals. Severing you from your family wasn't just cultural, it was like cutting the cord to the divine. Suddenly, people who once had dozens of generations guiding their steps now found themselves cast into silence, unable to call on a name, a face, or a grave. And it wasn't random. The system relied on this. Enslavers weren't afraid of rebellion because of weapons. They feared memory. Memory is what makes people dangerous. Memory is what makes people refuse to accept chains. It's what fuels uprisings, cultural continuity, and revolutionary identity. That's why the greatest weapon of the transatlantic slave trade wasn't the whip. It was forgetting. Even more cruelly, the enslaved weren't just prevented from remembering their past. They were also forced to build a new reality where that past could never fully return. In plantation fields, a Yoruba priest might work next to a Congo fisherman and a Fula horseman, and they would have no way of knowing they might have shared ancestors just 200 miles apart. Instead, they were forced into a new role: property. That was the only identity allowed. And so, with no names, no stories, no rituals, no context, generation after generation of Black Americans were born into a world where they were expected to exist without roots. But the nightmare didn't stop on the ships. Once in America, the system found even more ways to burn every remaining trace. Once the enslaved reached American shores, their transformation into property wasn't symbolic. It was brutally administrative. The ancestors who once walked through sacred groves, bore the names of clans, and danced in tribal rituals were now lines in an account book. The erasure of identity wasn't just cultural, it was converted into profit. On paper, Black people became inventory. Ledgers replaced family trees. Plantation owners didn't ask, "Who are you?" They asked, "How much are you worth?" And the answers were chilling. Male, age 17, strong back, $450. That was your existence now, not a name, not a homeland, just a market value beside a cotton field. And while the Middle Passage may have severed the connection to the past, the American plantation system ensured that no new roots could grow. Births weren't recorded for meaning, they were recorded for inheritance. Children weren't celebrated, they were anticipated investments. Future labor counted before their first breath. Marriages weren't legal. Families weren't recognized. Splitting families apart was a business strategy, a form of social control. If you had no kin, you had no shield. If you had no lineage, you had no claim. But the most chilling fact, this wasn't considered abnormal, it was standardized. Across the South, slave schedules, census tallies, and ownership documents began to build an entire bureaucracy around dehumanization. Black people were systematically removed from history, not by forgetting, but by substituting humanity with data. And this data was always incomplete, fragmented, or deliberately distorted. Ages were guessed, names changed on a whim, identities falsified to prevent escape or rebellion. This made tracing ancestry nearly impossible for future generations. How can a great-great-grandchild find their origins when their ancestor's real name was never written down? When entire family lines were broken, sold, renamed, and moved across states like cattle? Even worse, the very structure of American record-keeping told Black people they didn't matter. While white landowners had deeds, records, signatures, and grave sites, enslaved people had no proof they ever existed, let alone who they descended from. Many today can trace their white lineage back centuries, but for millions of Black Americans, the trail goes dark by the mid-1800s, as if their families simply blinked into existence during slavery. But this was no accident. It was the design. The system didn't just refuse to recognize your identity, it made sure future generations would inherit that same blankness. And after slavery ended, you'd think the truth would finally be reclaimed. But what followed next was even more devastating. An education system and cultural narrative that told Black children they had no past worth knowing. By the time slavery was legally abolished, the chains had already sunk deep, not just into bodies, but into minds. And that was the point. The physical shackles were removed, but they had been replaced with something far more effective. A system that taught Black children to forget who they were before the plantation. What wasn't wiped out on the ships or in the ledgers was finished off in the classroom. After emancipation, the newly freed were given schools, but not the truth. The very idea of educating black children came with conditions. You can learn, but only what we allow you to know. And so began a mass social experiment in intellectual containment. Textbooks in the South glorified Confederate leaders. Northern schools barely touched on slavery at all. Africa was a blank continent, sometimes mentioned only for its jungles, its savages, or its darkness. Never its kingdoms. Never forget its knowledge. For most black children growing up in the U.S., history class didn't start with them. It started without them. The syllabus was built like a wall. Ancient Greece, Rome, the Enlightenment, the Founding Fathers. All white, all Western, all framed as the beginning of civilization. Meanwhile, African civilizations like Mali, Axum, Congo, or Benin were left out completely, as if black people didn't exist until they became slaves. And if Africa was mentioned, it was often reduced to a caricature: drums, huts, and famine. Never Mansa Musa, the richest man to ever walk the earth. Never Timbuktu, where scholars studied astronomy and medicine while Europe was still burning witches. Never the queens who led armies, the architects who built stone cities, or the healers who practiced science long before the term existed in English. The result? Generational amnesia disguised as education. A child growing up in the 1920s or even the 1970s might go from kindergarten to college without ever learning their ancestors had empires, not just chains. And even when black educators tried to include that history, they were dismissed, defunded, or fired. The message was clear. You're allowed to exist, but not to know where you come from. And over time, that silence did its job. People stopped asking, stopped searching, because how do you look for something when the world has told you for generations that it never existed? But the most dangerous part? The damage wasn't only internal. As the curriculum erased Africa from its pages, so did the wider society erase it from its respect. Black names, languages, clothing, and even skin were mocked as primitive. And in place of pride, a generation was handed shame. Not because of anything they'd done, but because of what they'd been told to forget. And just when you think it couldn't go deeper, it does. Because even today, the most advanced tools, DNA, technology, and science, still leave Black Americans chasing shadows with no clear map of home. After generations of silence in classrooms and invisibility in records, many Black Americans turned to the one thing that promised answers without bias: science. DNA testing kits, Ancestry, 23andMe, and African Ancestry exploded in popularity with a simple promise: we can tell you who you are. And for a brief moment, it felt like redemption. Spit in a tube, wait a few weeks, and finally, the mystery of origin could be cracked. 33% Nigerian, 21% Ghanaian, 16% Bantu peoples of Southern Africa. For those who had grown up hearing only vague terms like African American, these percentages felt like a lifeline, something solid to hold on to. But here's the painful truth. Those numbers don't tell the full story. They often mislead more than they reveal. Why? Because science isn't broken, it's incomplete. Modern genetic databases rely on reference populations, meaning your DNA is compared to samples from current African groups. But the transatlantic slave trade ended centuries ago. Tribes were displaced, ethnic lines blurred. Entire nations were redrawn by colonizers who didn't care about pre-existing cultures. And many African regions, especially rural ones, have never even been sampled for these databases. So when a test says you're 27% Cameroon or Congo, that doesn't mean your ancestors came from that exact region. It means your DNA matches what the company has available, and those maps are drawn by limited data, Western anthropology, and genetic guesses. Even worse, these results can change over time. You could test today and be told you're 40% Nigerian, then test again next year and get 25% Sierra Leone. Not because your DNA changed, but because their data changed. That should be the first red flag. But there's another layer, even sicker than flawed data: the commercialization of identity. The desire for roots has become a business model. Companies know that Black Americans have been robbed of history, so they market DNA kits like spiritual reunions. Glossy ads promise reconnection, homecomings, and lost family rediscovered. But what they're selling is an emotional illusion, one built on probabilities, not certainties. And yet, for many, it's the only tool they have. Because even if science is imperfect, hunger is real. People are desperate to know more than a percentage. They want stories, tribes, songs, languages. They want a place on a map where they can say, "This is where my blood runs deepest." But no test can tell you the name your ancestor whispered when they prayed. No algorithm can restore the burial ground bulldozed by a plantation. No chart can reconnect you to the family stolen 5 generations back. What DNA gives is a spark, a nudge in a direction. But it can't replace the centuries of culture, memory, and language that were systematically destroyed. So what happens when science too falls short? Here's a quick reminder. Please like, share, and subscribe to Black Culture Unlocked for powerful Black news, real stories of our heroes and leaders, and the rich culture and history the world tried to forget. When science fails to hand over the key to identity, many Black Americans turn their gaze toward the living source of their ancestry, Africa itself. But what they find isn't always the embrace they imagined. The relationship between Black Americans and the African continent is deep, emotional, and often strained, for reasons born of history's brutality. Centuries of separation didn't just create distance. They created 2 worlds that no longer speak the same language, literally and spiritually. On one side is Black America, a people forged in survival, with identities pieced together from fragments, forced to build culture anew from what little was allowed to remain. On the other side is Africa, a vast, diverse land of nations that have their scars: colonization, exploitation, border lines drawn by European rulers, and internal struggles for unity and healing. And so, when a Black American visits Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, or Benin searching for home, they often encounter a bittersweet truth. Africa remembers itself, but it does not remember you, not because it doesn't care, but because that memory was stolen long ago. This gap is no one's fault, but it is everyone's burden. Many Africans see Black Americans as foreigners, as outsiders shaped by a different history. And many Black Americans taught from birth that Africa is a place of poverty or primitiveness arrive with unconscious biases, products of the same Western systems that robbed them of their connection in the first place. This creates a silent tension. On both sides, people look into the mirror of the diaspora and don't always recognize their reflection. But underneath that tension is longing, a hunger to mend the fracture. And in recent years, efforts have grown stronger. From Ghana's Year of Return campaign that welcomed African descendants to the motherland, to the rise of Pan-African festivals and collaborations in art, music, and politics, both sides are trying to rebuild the bridge that history burned. Afrobeat and hip-hop cross oceans. Nollywood films find audiences in Brooklyn and Atlanta. Black entrepreneurs in the U.S. are investing in African startups. The ties, though fragile, are forming. But the work is not just in tourism or business. It's in healing the psychological damage left by centuries of forced forgetting. It's in unlearning the myths told on both sides of the Atlantic. It's in realizing that the enemy wasn't Black America or Africa. It was the system that worked so hard to keep them apart. And perhaps that is the most sacred task of all. To see each other again, not as strangers divided by time and ocean, but as pieces of the same shattered whole, finally trying to become one. Because the journey to rediscover origins is not just about DNA, documents, or textbooks. It's about reclaiming a unity that was never meant to survive, but still does, in defiance of history itself. If the bond between Black Americans and Africa is fragile but healing, there's a reason that healing hasn't been easier. And it's not because of a lack of will. It's because there are powerful forces that have everything to lose if that bridge is ever fully rebuilt. From the moment enslaved Africans arrived in the Americas, Western powers didn't just fear rebellion, they feared reunion. A connected diaspora is a powerful diaspora, one that can move money, knowledge, and politics across continents, one that can reshape the narrative of what it means to be Black in a world built on Black exploitation. So the system made sure to keep Black Americans and Africans confused about each other, distrustful and emotionally distant. One of the most effective weapons? Media. Hollywood has rarely portrayed Africa as anything other than a continent of warlords, starving children, and jungle tribes. The few films that break this pattern, like Black Panther, are celebrated because they are exceptions, not the rule. Meanwhile, African television channels flooded with Western content often show Black Americans as angry, violent, or lost. This isn't a coincidence, it's propaganda. It's the slow drip of misinformation designed to make both sides suspicious of each other. But it goes even deeper. Global politics has historically operated on a divide and exploit model. The West doesn't want a strong Africa, and it doesn't want a unified Black global consciousness. That's why Pan-African movements were monitored, undermined, and in many cases, killed off. Did you know that the FBI labeled Martin Luther King Jr. a national threat not just because of his civil rights work, but because he was beginning to speak on African liberation and international Black unity? The same system that feared Malcolm X's pilgrimage to Mecca and meeting with African leaders is the one that branded Patrice Lumumba of Congo a communist and approved his assassination. Whenever a Black leader tried to unite the global Black experience, whether from the US or the continent, they were silenced, or worse. Even today, when Black Americans begin to engage politically with African issues, speak on Congo's cobalt, Nigeria's oil, or Burkina Faso's independence from Western influence, they're often met with silence or redirection from mainstream Western media. It's as if their voices don't belong in international conversations, even when it's their ancestors' land being discussed. That silence is intentional, because the moment the African diaspora realizes its collective economic, cultural, and political weight, everything changes. Trade flows change, voting patterns shift, narratives collapse, power is redistributed. And so, to prevent that, distraction is deployed. Keep Black Americans focused on survival, culture wars, and domestic oppression, but keep them disconnected from the global context that explains so much of it. Make Africa feel far away, make its problems feel unrelated, and by doing so, make sure the wound never fully heals. But despite the pressure to stay divided, the movement for reconnection hasn't stopped. It's simply gone underground, through books, music, spirituality, and digital communities. Because the truth is rising, and as that truth rises, it begins to shine a light on the one remaining system that holds all the pieces of the past hostage: Western institutions of memory and control. After centuries of severance, the search for origin has turned desperate. But what if the missing pieces, the artifacts, the names, the languages, the family connections, haven't been lost at all? What if they've simply been taken? All across Europe and the United States, in climate-controlled vaults and glossy museums, lie the stolen fragments of African identity: masks, scrolls, drums, birth records, Bibles translated into local languages, ancestral statues, even bones. These aren't just relics of a forgotten time. They are the very items that could rebuild the link between Black Americans and their pre-slavery roots, if only they were accessible. But they're not, because from London to Paris to Washington, institutions built on empire are still hoarding the memory of the people they once enslaved. The British Museum alone holds over 90,000 African objects. France has tens of thousands more. These were not gifted. They were looted, ripped from shrines, libraries, and royal houses during colonization, war, and missionary campaigns. And to this day, they remain behind glass or in archives that are under review for repatriation, a process that conveniently moves at the pace of molasses. But here's what makes it sicker. Many of these items contain the exact cultural DNA Black Americans have been looking for. Take royal genealogy scrolls stolen from the Dahomey Kingdom, modern-day Benin, or spiritual texts written in ancient Ensabidi or Ge'ez, or the carved ancestor masks that once belonged to families, some of which still have identifiable markings. These aren't just historical pieces. They are literal evidence of existence. Imagine being told your entire life that your past is lost, only to find it's on display in a European museum under the title Anonymous African Origin, 18th Century. No tribe, no name, no story, just a barcode and a plaque, and it gets worse. Even in institutions that claim to preserve history, like American universities, access is tightly controlled. African American scholars seeking to study colonial records, church registries, or oral transcripts often face bureaucratic walls, restricted access, or outright dismissal. If they want to understand their lineage through colonial missionary logs or plantation diaries, they must go through systems designed by the same powers that erased them in the first place. This is not preservation. It's possession. It's not enough that identity was stolen. It's now curated, owned, studied, and monetized by the very powers that disrupted it. And until the keys to those archives are handed over, until the artifacts come home, the diaspora will always be told it has no past, even while that past sits silently in museum basements, labeled but unnamed, present but unreachable. But the fight to reclaim these memories is growing. Scholars, activists, and nations are demanding return not just of objects, but of truth. And what happens when the truth is finally returned? It's not just cultural healing, it's ideological warfare. Because rememory isn't passive. It challenges textbooks. It questions property rights. It calls into account not just what was stolen, but what was built from the theft. When a Black American traces their roots back to an empire looted by France, or a sacred site desecrated by Britain, it's not just about reclaiming identity. It's about exposing the lies still embedded in global institutions. And that makes governments nervous. Why do you think so many countries resist returning artifacts, or delay opening archives, or suppress historical education that links Africa and its diaspora with dignity and power? Because the moment people know who they are, they stop accepting crumbs. They demand land, reparations, representation, and justice not as charity, but as inheritance. Even more frightening to the establishment is this. Once memory returns, unity follows. When a Nigerian academic links research with a Black student from Chicago, or a Ghanaian entrepreneur collaborates with a Caribbean activist, they are doing more than networking. They are stitching together what colonialism and slavery worked relentlessly to tear apart. Rememory becomes the seed of Pan-Africanism. And Pan-Africanism, at its core, is a threat to Western hegemony, because it means Africans and their descendants speaking for themselves, trading with each other, building media that tells the truth, and creating systems that don't require Western validation to function. It means replacing charity with solidarity, replacing aid with alliance, replacing trauma with purpose. That is why rememory is feared. Not because it's emotional, but because it's strategic. And the more people remember, the harder it becomes to control them. People with no past can be molded. People who remember who they are, they resist. So in a world built on the Black diaspora's disconnection, even the act of remembering, of saying I am not just a survivor, I am a descendant, becomes a revolutionary act. And as that revolution of memory spreads, it doesn't just heal individuals. It starts to rewrite history itself. Once memory becomes a threat, it doesn't stay quiet. It moves, it speaks, it sings. And in today's world, it is doing something even more powerful. It's performing itself on the global stage. The revolution of rememory hasn't just stayed in books or private DNA results. It's spilled out into music, fashion, protest, and public imagination. Because culture, more than any institution, has become the language through which stolen memory is now being reclaimed. Take music. Listen to the rise of Afrobeats in global charts, the way Black American hip-hop samples traditional African drum patterns, or how Caribbean soca pulls rhythms from Yoruba chants. This isn't just cross-cultural fusion, it's an ancestral echo. A scattered people relearning the beat their ancestors were forced to forget. Artists like Burna Boy, Tems, Kendrick Lamar, and Janelle Monáe aren't just creating entertainment. They're stitching together centuries of separation with every track. The moment a Black teenager in Detroit nods their head to a rhythm born in Lagos or Accra, the lie of disconnection begins to unravel. Fashion, too, has become a form of rebellion. The resurgence of kente cloth, cowrie shells, tribal prints, and natural hairstyles isn't just style. It's a coded resistance against centuries of erasure. For so long, Black features were ridiculed, and African dress was seen as primitive. But now, those very symbols are center stage at Paris Fashion Week, red carpets, and political rallies. This cultural resurrection isn't nostalgia, it's reclamation. And it doesn't stop with aesthetics. It extends into activism. Movements like Black Lives Matter, End SARS, and Pan-African climate campaigns are not isolated uprisings. They are linked by the memory of collective survival and collective loss. When protesters in Brooklyn chant the names of the dead, and protesters in Nigeria tweet in solidarity, they are engaging in a kind of memory politics, one that bypasses textbooks and makes history alive, immediate, and global. Even technology has become a battleground for remembering. Black creators on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube are telling the stories schools never did. Digital griots, uploading lost lineages, decoding stolen symbols, teaching forgotten gods. No institution can silence this wave, because the internet gave the diaspora something it hadn't had since the 1400s, a platform without a gatekeeper. In all of this, culture becomes more than expression. It becomes correction. It rewrites falsehoods. It challenges colonial definitions. And more importantly, it inspires a new generation that doesn't just accept who they are, but dares to investigate who they were meant to be. This is how memory wins, not by going backwards, but by pushing forward through every art form, every political moment, every creative spark that refuses to die. And yet, for all this progress, one final question remains. Once Black Americans remember who they are, what will they do with that power? The rediscovery of origin, the reconnection with Africa, the unraveling of lies, they aren't ends in themselves. They are beginnings. A remembered people is a mobilized people. And what comes next is not nostalgia, not revenge, but reconstruction. For generations, Black communities were taught to fight only for survival. Civil rights, basic justice, protection from violence. But now, with memory as armor and truth as compass, a new vision is emerging, one that asks, what if survival was just the floor and legacy was the ceiling? This shift is already underway. We see it in the growing investment of Black Americans into African economies, not as tourists but as co-builders. Technology hubs in Lagos, Accra, and Nairobi are drawing in diaspora talent. Pan-African conferences are turning from symbolic gestures into strategic coalitions. The idea is simple. If we were once broken apart by force, we can choose to reconnect by design. We see it in education, too. More and more young Black scholars are rejecting Eurocentric frameworks and reconstructing African-centered systems of knowledge, from healing practices to law, architecture to philosophy. The goal isn't just to know history. The goal is to build a future from within it. Even within the U.S., rememory is sparking a new kind of movement, not just to reform broken systems, but to create alternatives rooted in ancestral knowledge. Schools, cooperatives, land trusts, art collectives, and healing centers are rising spaces where Black identity isn't tolerated but central. The mission is clear: to reclaim everything that was denied, not just the past, but the power to shape what comes next. Because when memory returns, silence dies. And once silence dies, systems tremble. Economic systems, political systems, cultural myths. The same structures that once relied on Black people not knowing who they were must now face the terrifying reality of an entire people waking up with clarity and direction. This isn't just an identity shift. It's a global reorientation, one where Africa is no longer viewed as a source of extraction, and Black America is no longer a community in crisis, but a reunited force capable of rewriting the terms of power. The road to that future won't be easy. It will take imagination, risk, and unlearning. But it begins with a truth so simple it was once considered too dangerous to say. We were never lost. We were taken, and now we're coming back. Do you think unity can save Black people?
We were scattered to the four corners of the earth. We were scattered. And I know all the people that were scattered are not all the same people. I get that. But I understand exactly where the brother coming from. And man, this was a interesting and powerful video with a lot of points, things that you probably thought about, but didn't even bother to say out loud. He put all of those in there almost. And it was, yeah, interesting stuff. But, you know, on this channel, on this YouTube channel, when we broadcast to YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch, the objective of this channel is to bring in our people who are asleep, wake them up, and remind them, because you should know from way back that you are a child, a son or a daughter of the Most High, the power of Israel, and that the Most High is going to bring us back again and restore us to prominence. That's what he said he was going to do. That is his promise to us. So that's what we await, our restoration. Now, during the time of our scattering, we went through a lot of various situations. One of those various situations we went through is known as the diaspora. That's how we ended up, Ma'ak and I, in this area. You know what I'm saying? We was two brothers separated probably from close by or similar or same tribes. And all these generations later, here we are now, you know, back again, breaking bread and on, you know, on the same page, understanding what it is that we're supposed to be doing and not just horsing off. So anyhow, interesting stuff, very interesting stuff. This is one of those you might have to watch twice or three times to really get the information coming out of it, because there was so much that went into it, and there was so much coming out of it to just get it in one passing, not likely. But I'll tell you this, and I'll cut it off here. There's a lot to be learned, and it was interesting when he talked about DNA and how that's not going to put you right where you want to be. You know, the DNA test that I took, it's called Deuteronomy 28, and in Deuteronomy 28, it cost me absolutely nothing. But what it told me was that my people were connected to these people that was written in these books. And my people had to be direct descendants of these people because we have so much in common. And if that's the case for you, welcome to the tribe. If it's not, so be it. But I'm gonna go ahead and rest there. Go ahead, Akeem.
Khan, that was something that stood out to me as well, you know, when he was speaking about, you know, the DNA test and how, you know, you take it one year and it tells you that, you know, your people are from, you know, Nigeria, then you take it another year and, you know, it says Sierra Leone. I think that is also a indication that these people in West Africa, you know, for the vast majority of them are related people.
Right.
You know, I was it's funny that we even checked this out and that he mentioned that. I was checking out the origins of the Akan people who are in Ghana today, but they were talking about how their ancestors were the Saniki people. And, you know, I know you've heard me talk about the Saniki quite a bit here in the last couple of months because that name keeps on popping up with so many of these tribes who are in West Africa. So the Saniki they're related to the Mandi people, the Bafori people, all of these people in West of Kebulon. And even further than that, if we were to, and you're right, you're absolutely right. You know, it wasn't a DNA test that convicted my Ruach on who we were. It was the scripts, you know, talking to me, you know. However, you know, if we were to look up, you know, our DNA, you know, being E1B1A, we would come to the conclusion that comes from one patriarch who had 12 sons with 4 different women, you know, making the 12 tribes of Yasharal, who it is prophesied would be as numerous as the stars in the sky. And, you know, that's how we have the link to the Bantu people, the link to the Yoruba people, the link to the Igbo people, to the Limba people, so many different, the Efik people, so many different people having a similar traveling story as well. And even being some of these tribes who don't even get along now have traveling companion stories where they came from the East together, but split up, you know? So all praises to the Most High for this information no longer being hidden and us having the opportunity to bring it out for, you know, like you said, our people. Shalom.
No doubt. Shalom. All praises to the Most High. Yes, indeed. We'll go ahead and close this on down for the time being. We'll be back tomorrow with scripture study, and we'll plan on hitting up 7 good chapters, continuing from where we at 1 Kings.
Still
in 1 Kings. We'll be finishing that here not too long from now. I can't remember exactly where we were because I hadn't looked at it since last week. But anyhow, that'll be a good time. Other than that, I don't have anything else. So let's go ahead and close it on out. We do this for a very specific purpose. Simple and plain. Romans chapter 10 and verse 1. Brethren, my heart's desire and prayer to Ha'abah for Israel is that they might be saved. We want to see our people saved. We want to see our people set free. And we want to see our people released from bondage. How are we going to do that? First of all, we're going to keep the belief and the faith in Hamashiach, the Messiah, in his return, and to fulfill all the words that the Most High have said that he would fulfill. Second, Ecclesiastes chapter 12 and verse 13. Let us see the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear the Most High and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. It is so very important to understand that in the conclusion of the whole matter, we are to fear the Most High and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. At the end of the day, when it is all said and done, all the dust is settled and all the smoke is cleared, we will be judged, or rather we have feared the Most High and kept his commandments. Why? For this is the whole duty of man. I am your Akazaki Yahu, joined by my most esteemed Akinanaya, giving all praises, honor, and great esteem unto the Most High Power, Yahweh, Bashem, Hamashiach, Wamalak, Yahweh Shai, and to the 12 tribes of Israel, who are scattered to the 4 quarters of the earth. I say Shalom, Wa, Baruchim, that is peace and blessings. And I cannot wait till the day when the Most High brings us back together, and we are once again 12 tribes, one family, one nation, under the Most High Power, under one covenant, back in our own land with a heart of flesh and no more a heart of stone, with our enemies, our adversaries, and all those who hate us under our feet. Until that day come, Shalom, family.
Shalom, Mr. Pekah.
All praises to the Abba, Praise you, Abba Yah. Kwam Yasha'Allah.
Kwam Yasharallah.
And Barak Hashem Yahweh.